Well, we can go ahead and start. We'll have kind of a small group, and I was hoping to facilitate a meeting, facilitate a discussion about last week's um, presentation. So it might be a little bit challenging with fewer people here, but we'll give it a shot. Trevor talked to us about regional curves, mini regional curves in Ontario, I believe it was. He talked about relating drainage area to bankful area, and went through a really good discussion on how he did that, his results. He um, he was uh, primarily looking at how to get a check or a starting point on how to design channels or how to size channels in restoration work. Uh, but I think uh, during that discussion, something come up that was kind of I don't know. It was intriguing to me. It was kind of what I was thinking of as he was talking. Uh, how this relates to urbanized systems. It's uh, been on my head a lot, thinking lately, and it must have been with other people too. We all talked about, or it seemed like that kind of hit a chord, and David, you even picked up and carried the second part of the class kind of impromptu, and we talked about the impacts of land cover on streams, and some of his results was quite surprising to me. If I remember correctly, he said that surprisingly, land use didn't have that much impact on the bankful area. He also mentioned that, according to the streams he looked at, bankful area wasn't impacted by if it was grassed or wooded channel, but it but grass channels did end up having a little bit different dimensions, maybe a little bit deeper. Um, and similarly, David, I think when you were talking, I think were sort of dancing around the concept of these multi-stage channels that maybe in the urban areas that you've looked at, and that one study with Watts Branch that's been going on for so long and continues to go on, uh, maybe there may be a multi-stage channel there, but generally that channel forming discharge, that lower channel was was pretty consistent along in different areas that you've looked at throughout the country. So that was very intriguing to me, and uh, I was hoping, I'm glad some more people joined in. I was hoping maybe we could have some reactions to that, um, and so I hope you get your thumb ready to come off mute. But was I the only one that was surprised? And did I hear that correct? That the land use cover didn't really have that big of an impact on the Batesville area uh, uh, in Ontario, and then David echoed that in some other places. So again, was I the only one that was sort of surprised about that?
Since last week, we had an opportunity to give a presentation with Mile High Flood District, and uh, I don't know if anybody else was surprised or not about that, but I did. Uh, we did. I did count up how many urban mini regional curves that I'm aware of that have been done by either myself or others related to it, and I think what we're coming up with right now is I have a slide on it, so that's I have to summarize it. But I think what we're saying is there you go. Let me share my screen. This is from a presentation last week. But since 2007, um, we've I, I've known of people that have been involved with a number of mini urban regional curves, and really 2007's the first time that Will Harmon shared the idea of a mini regional curve with me. So there might have been people doing this before that. I just didn't understand what the concept was. So I wasn't using the language. But these urban mini regional curves have been developed for 50 urban areas in 3 countries. And there are various degrees of urbanization. So some are suburban opposed to, heavy urban areas. But it's been in 19 different states and provinces. Um, and, so and then with that, we have individual urban areas. So we've had 50 curves being developed, but some of them have been on multiple locations. So, we've gone out one year and did a work on North Carolina urban regional curve, and then we went back out and did North Carolina urban regional curve a number of years later to double check the numbers that we came up with. And then we had some issues related to rainfall. So this is just to say that with you, Wade, is that it has seemed to be pretty consistent with us in the past on other urban areas. One of the issues that we've come up with is that there's not a lot of gauges at small drainages in urban areas. So when it comes to getting good gauge record, we don't have a great gauge record to develop kind of a full regional curve. We end up doing these mini regional curves.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe what does I mean we see impervious area, it does have an impact, and I think on What's Branch you saw uh, you all were able to describe it specifically and describe it faster than they originally thought they would, but it did have some impacts. I think there was a caveat in Trevor's discussion that uh, he sees an impact too, and he sees, I believe what he said was he's seen a head cut form, and then the stream reestablishes at a different slope. Uh, but still, the Bankful area stayed the same, is what he said. But I'm wondering from other people, and I think I see that a lot. That once urbanization occurs, the stream does change, and uh, I do frequently see a head cut come in, and then I think it's a long, long time before the stream ever gets stable again, and sometimes it may never get stable again in some of the places where I'm at because there's too many things beside the stream at that point. So there's always constantly people fighting the river from going where it wants to. So it really there's really this ongoing struggle to kind of fight against that quasi natural state. But just wondering, and maybe Alexa, Paula, Sydney, maybe one of you can describe what you see when a stream impacts urbanization, and don't feel obligated, but just trying to pull in some input here, or from anybody else either. What are some things that you see when an urban stream or as the land use changes? Um, do you see that Bankful area eventually come out, or what do you see the stream change like it did in what's branch? It kind of changed plan form, but not Bankful area.
I'll be brave.
Thank you, you saved me.
Yeah. I remember looking at the Piedmont urban area curve a while ago, just as I was looking at different streams with different levels of impervious cover in the North Carolina Piedmont area, and like the urban curve for the Piedmont, I think you had to have something like 30% impervious cover. And I came away with an idea of like, okay, that's kind of just urban drainage, and nothing I was working in was that high a percent of impervious cover. And I've more just used it as like, I'll use the rural curve or the regional curve that is available. But I know like the higher I get in impervious cover, the more likely I am to be kind of above the line in that range of scatter. Um, I don't work or haven't worked in many urban channels to like see how it develops. We did use like for one that was in like downtown Burlington for their arboretum, like we used like the rural curve. And I mean, but that one just had a lot of like sewer line and bedrock constraints. So channel size is highly variable throughout the reach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder how much it matters because we're having a conversation for one of the SQT regionalizations. Like there's definitely like sensitive watersheds and less sensitive watersheds. Like if you're down in I'm gonna forget where I was, but like just it was probably Georgia or another southern state that just had really flashy hydrology. Like the impervious cover can't matter that much if your natural hydrology is already pretty flashy. But maybe somewhere like Michigan, once you start getting more and more impervious cover, where there it's usually like a sponge and then you're paving the sponge, maybe that's where you'd see more like it nudge it higher, but I don't think there's like a predictable like when you're in an urban channel, like this is how much impervious cover is going to change your bankable area. Like it just all seems more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Trevor said somewhere around 20% impervious area um, is where is what they called urbanized. And I've done some watershed plans lately where we measured the impervious area, and I was really surprised that um, these areas would not be classified as urban. So, you know, it to get that 30% impervious area, it really is urban. There's no or in my experience, there's no ambiguity about that. It's urban. There's nobody would claim that it wasn't. So it does have quite a bit of impervious area uh, there. A lot of things that I've seen also is that with urban, um, there's other things that come in too. I know you have invasive species and just the type of plants around a stream I've seen really impact a stream. So really, it's not because of imperviousness, but because of the type of plants that are there, and then of course the outfalls and uh, the play a big impact. But I think a lot of the area I'm working at is just always in it's sandy area, so it's always in a state of flux. It's the sand is always shifting where I'm at, and our only grade control is vegetation. So one tree dies and it feels like you're on a different stream, and so um, so Morgan, you had a comment and encourage you to unmute if you would like to and come on and make your comment, or I can read it out if you would like.
Let me see if I can get on here. My camera. I don't know what you're seeing, but yeah, and I posed that question last time. I just think it's an interesting discussion, because we all talk about hydrology and bankfulls directly related to, what's going on in the watershed. And, describing channel enlargement, the overall channel, I think that's pretty straightforward that as it gets deeper and settles down in there, the overall geometry becomes enlarged. And we've observed that, in the order of 3 times, but kind of how that, say, low flow channel establishes itself. I just think that's interesting with observation has been, well, it stays the same. And that's really not intuitive. We're getting these pulses, that might have occurred a handful of times a year, and now they're occurring every time it rains. So it's just worth discussion, a bit of a mystery, just not intuitive to the way we understand channel dynamics. But I think it's interesting. So I don't have any, data to say, here's a whole nother data set and with a different set of conditions over, a particular threshold. So I just, continue to be curious about it. But I'll just say for channel enlargement, yeah, that's certainly an observed phenomenon. And we've tripled cross-sectional area in these sections where we've measured pre-development from old, what we do is, get these wastewater crossing profiles, that were the old surveys, even from like 1930, when they're cutting across the channel, then compare that and go back out and compare to what it is now. And it's significantly bigger. And we use that for kind of planning for erosion hazard zones, how big the whole thing's going to get. But if we're just kind of looking at the low flow, active, bank full, or interberm, whatever you're describing there, that's just one that I'm still struggling with, but worth talking about. And it's the data, that's what the data is showing. Just think, maybe even picking apart the data a little bit more, like you said, are these 30% or these 70%? Is there a threshold when we really start blowing things out? And to what you had said, the sandy streams, they're kind of still in a state of flux. They may temporarily stabilize and we get a big gully washer and kind of opens things up again. So are we observing kind of the final restored or stabilized, renaturalized state? So just some things to think about. But I appreciate the curiosity on the question for sure.
Hey, guess
Yeah,
what? Oh, go ahead, Wade. I
no,
was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
guess what? I have a thought. Ta-da.
All right.
Hey, I think it's real important that we're very focused on subscribing to the dominant process as it's noted by Bankful, and that's a stable stream process, and we're talking about disrupted streams. So maybe our dominant process is going to be a hybrid. We're looking for a point to put our finger on, and really the truth is these urban streams that are affected, they're out of regime, and so they're not behaving like in a predictable way. They're in a transitory. So I kind of feel like, while some things are not intuitive or might be intuitive, that the enlargement's kind of intuitive, but the fact that some of the dimension properties remain the same, it doesn't seem as intuitive. I think, and equally important is the point that Morgan points out in the study that Dave shared. There was a connectivity to an active floodplain or not, right? And so it's kind of like we get really focused on being more precise with our predictions, but really maybe we need to be looking at the bigger picture. Like, okay, this is a stream in Austin, or this is a stream in the upper Midwest. And I think everything everybody said, I think, yeah, oh yeah, that's a good point. Your soils are different and your valley slopes are flatter and you're getting a lot more, infiltration there, or maybe, maybe the urbanization doesn't have the same effect because of the environment or because of the rainfall. And all of that's true. And that's my point, is that this is an unusual craft. Unlike all of the other engineering disciplines that we know of or that are practiced, the engineer's job carries it to commodity, is to solve a problem, carry it to commodity, and make a relatively simple solution. Look it up in the MUTCD or look it up, and that's okay. That's good. There's a place for that. But what we see here, what I see, what gets reiterated in this conversation is that you can't distance yourself from the craft. It's really hugely important that in order to be a good steward, we take good assessment and we take good stock of what the dominant process or processes are, or what the transitory process is, whether it has available sediment or not in this transition, oftentimes paired with with a changed hydrology is a changed sediment regime, and looking into that, and just, I don't know. It's like with your children, you know, there are no two are the same, Dave. What, you have 5 kids? I don't know. No two of them are even 4. Okay, including yourself. Yeah. So, you know, I feel like that's, to me, I love that lane diagram. It's been in everybody's presentation, but it's good. And that's the thing. The lane diagram kind of says it. There are a lot of variables that factor in, and I think we get accustomed, and I think it's good that we are conditioned as engineers to kind of go with the format, but we need to pause and step away and say, what is this format? The format's designed for, you know, this is a measure of stable streams that have a, you know, a balanced sediment load and flow. So that's my reaction.
Yeah, thanks. Do you want to say something about that, Dave? The lane diagram?
Yeah, I like the idea that you said there, Josh, that the dominant process is disturbance. It's kind of a chuckle. But one thing that we noticed with the observation of these features related to percent impervious, and I only have one study that we've looked at this closely on, but coming out of the idea of the North Carolina regional curve, and as Cindy has said, with the 30% impervious, and being like, well, we don't have a whole lot of areas that are over 30% impervious. We tried to look in Harris, Texas back in 2007 at percent impervious, and we realized a number of our sites were below that 30% threshold. So this is kind of what we came up with when we started binning the percent impervious based on the amount of percent impervious. So we went anywhere from 10% impervious to 65% impervious. And we basically measured top of bank measurements on the channel. And the top of bank wasn't really, you know, the top of bank the way that Reds Woolman and Leopold Woolman, and Reds Woolman and Luna Leopold had noticed years ago, where it was really just kind of the top and the biggest break and slope. This was kind of the top of a bank for a geomorphic feature. So this is what we would have said in 2000 related to what bankful was in an urban channel. But then we started noticing that we have a feature below that that's more active. So this was trying to compare that feature we were seeing with urbanization in North Carolina to some streams in Harris County, Texas years ago. And the data that we collected, the neat thing about it is that we almost see 3 quasi-parallel lines. Now, obviously, you don't have a whole lot of drainage areas that are over 10 square miles that has 65% impervious. I mean, that's just a very densely urbanized area and a very big urbanized area. So, but based on your percent impervious, we had shown a geomorphic feature that seemed to be larger than bankful, that seemed to be consistent with the percent impervious if there was enough floodplain. If there wasn't enough floodplain, well, a lot of times we didn't see this anyways, and we didn't monitor those points because we said, okay, well, there's no geomorphic feature that was forming here because it was just active disturbance. It was actively cutting down. So that's one thing that we had noticed. So it leads us, like in Denver right now. I know I don't know if Will Wilhelm's on the line today, but Will's working a lot with streams in Denver area. And Mile High Flood District is an organization that takes over the long-term maintenance and stewardship of waterways in the Denver metro region. So they work with municipalities. So municipalities don't have to do long-term maintenance and stewardship. It just has to be eligible for maintenance eligibility, and Mile High Flood District will take over that long-term stewardship and maintenance. So it's a really neat program, and actually provides for the conservation and restoration of ephemeral and intermittent channels at times, because if Mile High Flood District says, hey, we'll take on long-term maintenance and stewardship of that waterway, then it doesn't really matter if it's ephemeral or intermittent if Mile High Flood District is going to take on this stewardship and maintenance. But one of the things that they came up with is they look at channel size, and and they want to look at channel size and as a percent of a recurrence interval because it's easy. And I think we're at the point where that's going to go away from the mile high flood district soon. But what they look at is to say, okay, well, give us 70% of the 2-year discharge or 10% of the 100-year discharge, whichever one's greater. And with a change of the 2-year discharge or with a change of the 100-year discharge, this geomorphic channel is going to change in size. And the tendencies that I see in the industry are that we're starting to think about, well, how big does a channel actually need to be? And we don't want to oversize channels. We want to have more floodplain connectivity wherever possible. And the value of having a channel within a floodplain is really about the stability of making sure that flows stay in a location for long-term stability, and we don't have horizontal migration and a higher potential for movement of the channel into infrastructure issues. So when it comes to the idea of channel size, and what I'm starting to find myself leaning towards is saying, okay, well, this is the size channel that the regional curve says, and then start giving myself reasoning and start looking at it and saying, hey, is there a reason why I can be a significantly smaller channel in here? Do I have space to allow this to be a stage 0 channel, to allow this to be a stage 8 channel, or just allow it to be a priority 2 channel with an undersized inner berm channel instead of a bankful channel? And that's more related to risk assessment. And one of the things that Will Wilhelm had shared with me that I really liked, I think last year he presented on River Sheridan. He said return intervals are used to assign risk, not to design streams. And I think we find ourselves a lot of times wanting to use return intervals as a design for stream restoration, opposed to just assessing risk. So I think that kind of are some of my thoughts related to the craft, as you will, or the kind of, as Josh was saying, kind of having to look at it in a more nuanced point than just saying, hey, I'm going to design to this regional curve. But sometimes we want to be designing a significantly smaller channel than what the regional curve would show us, and the regional curve is more of an assessment tool than a design tool.
I think this discussion is great. A lot of things, especially with you, Dave. I come at it from such a different background, and it causes me to kind of, I feel like a puppy when he turns his head sideways to try to understand something a lot of times. And I appreciate this discussion that everybody's having, because you do get a better view of what's going on. I think a lot of my view of what's going on is right after a development happens, working for municipalities, you'll get a call that the stream has failed, as and it's really just adjusting to things. But I'd like what you said, Josh, about, all these things are different. And I'm thinking, I do a lot of work in Georgia and Alabama, and I almost have to wear a different hat, even in just the difference between Georgia and Alabama, to look at things differently. And then even where I'm at on the Mobile Bay, you have to treat one side of the bay completely different than the other side of the bay, and it kind of brings up one of the thoughts that I frequently use, or the way I think about the streams is it's almost like they're individuals, they're living things. And I've had streams where uh, I've done the design, the vegetation has grown great, and I walk away thinking, that I'm this gift to engineering, that everything went great, and just, man, I'm such a great engineer. And then I'll have others that I have problems with. And I feel like I did the same thing or pretty close to the same thing, and then the one that was great, next thing you know, it's starting to get invasives or growing wild hair and starting to do weird things. And then the next one, it's kind of entered a different season where seems like it's calmed down, and I've kind of kind of related it to kids. Man, I did the same thing. I got 4 kids. I did exactly the same thing, and the results from those same kids are so different. They grew up in the same house. They were fed the same food. They good or bad. They had my same input, yet
Oh, it's David Woody.
they happen a lot different. Go ahead.
Oh, that was quick.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe that's it. Does anybody have anything else before we go to the next part of the presentation, or would like to add anything?
I don't know if Grant is on the line, but I know Grant, you probably definitely thought about channel sizing significantly in urban environments, but he may or may not be available to talk right now.
Talking to me, Dave?
I am, yeah, I'm talking to
Called
you.
out.
I know I avoid urban warfare whenever possible. I mean, I would just go back to, most of what we deal with, or most of what all this is based on, is channels and regime. And urban streams or not, we can make them as natural as we want to, but realistically,
Oh my gosh, I can't get it to turn down.
that's just the conundrum. So yeah, I avoid urban channels if at all possible.
Well-
And I guess the other thing I'd say is, I mean, on the urban data, I think you just have to be careful that you're not seeing signatures. Streams will make multiple signatures for bankful. And if you look for the wrong signature, or you're too focused on one particular signature, you may be picking up data that is not as relevant as you think it is. So I would just be cautious about how you interpret channel forms in urban settings.